Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. I got this comment from Jason NO FT7QF, or at least that's the handle. He says, Jerusalem is under siege by Hamas rockets. Please talk about this. That caught my attention because I have more or less followed the rocket attacks during this war. Not so much recently, and we haven't talked about Israel recently or the war because I feel like there hasn't been anything big enough to really talk about, except for right now. We're going to talk about this rocket attack on Jerusalem. We're going to talk about news that's coming out today. By the way, I'm recording this on Friday night, so December 15th. And let's see, we're going to talk about some other interesting things and just the progress of the war and what's going on. So first off, today, the 15th, is the 70th day of the war. And there's a couple interesting things that have happened today. First, there was this rocket attack on Jerusalem, which is not very common, and we'll go into that later. Also, there were 3 hostages that were killed by the Israeli army by accident, and that's causing a stir. I want to start off, before we talk about that, I want to start off by looking at Artza. There's an update that they have right here. At least 1,200 civilians and soldiers killed in Israel since October 7th. Over 138 hostages still held in Gaza. So that's better than what it was. It was over 200, but it's still way too many. Obviously, they all need to be returned home. And then Hamas-run health ministry says 18,608 killed, 50,594 wounded in Gaza. Now, I don't know if that's correct. Obviously, during wartime, sometimes for psychological reasons, you don't want to admit how many have been killed, or you want to inflate those numbers to get sympathy from the outside. So I'm just noting that it may not be correct, but if it is, you may recall I put together this spreadsheet a while ago where I explored the idea that the final war, Gog and Magog, because I think a lot of people have in their minds that it's like a single war and it takes 3.5 years and, just all this stuff, all the literal stuff, which it could be. But I was exploring the idea that this entire conflict, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and also the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, could be essentially that war, that this conflict is so big that it involves multiple wars and rebellions and operations and things like that. So I put together this spreadsheet a long time ago. I tallied up the death toll from different wars and then terrorism by year. I haven't updated 2023, so it's been more since I put that number 13. But column C is for all the deaths from terrorism, and you can see a lot of people have died since Israel became a state. Now, with this new number, I already had 1,200 for the Israeli side. For the Palestinian side, the last time that I updated this, it was at 11,000. So if it's actually at 18,608, that's gone up quite a bit since last time. And let's compare that to other wars and conflicts. The only one that comes close would be the first Lebanon war, which according to my research, the low estimate for that war was 5,000 Palestinians, and then the high estimate is 20,000. So if it's 20,000, then this war is approaching that number. And then if we continue going back in time, there's no other war that comes close, except for maybe the War of Independence, where the high estimate was 13,000. So in Israeli history, this may already be the deadliest war for Palestinians, if this number is correct. And if it's not correct, at the very least, I think with some confidence we could say it is definitely a significant war in terms of Palestinian deaths. As far as Israeli deaths, again, 1,200. You go back in time. The Yom Kippur War saw more, 2,688. The War of Attrition, 1,600. And then the War of Independence, 6,000. So that's how this war compares to those. But it's not over yet. Again, we're just on day 70. I've considered, prophets of old trying to describe this conflict. If they were describing not a single 3.5 year war, that's exactly 3.5 years, but if they're talking about this big conflict that involves all these different wars and battles and rebellions, like the intifadas, how would they describe it in the scriptures? Well, I don't know. Maybe they would describe it specifically and they'd lay out all the different things. Maybe they would somehow talk about the Second Lebanon War or Operation Pillar of Defense in some kind of way, but probably not. So I wouldn't be surprised if when we're talking about the final war, it's been going on since Israel became a state. Now that could be wrong. It could be wrong. But one thing with this war that we're in right now, the Israel-Hamas war, there's a particular scripture that's come to mind that I feel pretty well describes what's been going on during this particular war. Zechariah 14 verses 1 through 3. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be taken. And now, this is another thing. I'm not so sure that ancient prophets would refer to the state of Israel as the state of Israel. I don't know what they would have called it, but I wouldn't be surprised if just generically referring to Jerusalem as being the land of Israel, both the city, but also the area controlled by Jerusalem. Maybe that's the verbiage that they would use when talking about the state of Israel. So let's look at that. And this is speculation, and I'm not saying that this is doctrine, okay? But let's say that that's what Zechariah is trying to convey. For I will gather all nations against Israel to battle, and the country, the nation, shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the country shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fought in the day of battle. And then it goes on to talk about Christ coming to the Mount of Olives. So, no, in this case, half of Israel has not literally been taken into captivity. I guess it depends on how you define captivity, but probably not really in any sense of the word. But with this war, there have been many captives. This is one thing that separates this war from others, is all the hostages that were taken on that very first day, on October 7th. It's one of the defining features of this war. And it's actually basically the main reason, from what I can tell, why the ground operation is taking place in Gaza. It's to go and rescue the hostages. And there have been women ravished, especially on that first day. But since that time, you might say, well, it says half. So if we're talking about literally Jerusalem, the city, and half of them taken captive, maybe that will play out exactly like this, just in a very literal way. Or maybe Zechariah isn't meaning to give actual quantities, but just to describe just how horrific things are going to be, and that a lot of people are going to be taken captive. I don't know that he would have said there's going to be 250 taken captive, So those are just some things to consider. Now, let's look at the progress of the war. First, we're going to look at the Institute for the Study of War, their map that they put together. Here's the Gaza Strip. If it'll load. Okay, we'll come back to that. Let's go to War Mapper on X. This is another group or account that puts together war maps. So what they have here, we're looking at the southern Gaza Strip and specifically the city of Khan Yunis. And it looks like Israeli forces are essentially encompassing city center. If I'm looking at this right, I think that this is city center right here, but whatever it is, they're definitely around it and have it surrounded. So you have these operations now going on in southern Gaza. I think the last time that we had spoken about this, they were still mainly in northern Gaza, but now there's a lot more presence in southern Gaza. You can also see some incursions along the border right here and in like this little corner at the bottom. Let's see. Here we go. Institute for the Study of War. This is what they have for the northern Gaza Strip. There's much more like presence, right? For all I know, they're still making their way through these portions. I don't really know at this point, but when we go south, they paint a similar picture. There's a few differences, but not anything really significant from what War Mapper had. So this is what things look like right now. It looks like Khan Yunis is actually over here. And then there's Bani, Suhaila. So I guess maybe that's the city that they have encompassed at the moment. But I know that Khan Yunis is a major city where a lot of the Hamas operatives were radicalized in their youth and came from Khan Yunis primarily. I heard somebody talking about that one time. Okay. Now, let's move on to this. Okay. Israeli Defense Forces the IDF says it mistakenly killed 3 hostages, Yodam Haim, Samer Talakla, and Alon Shamriz during its campaign in Gaza after misidentifying them as a threat. And then rocket attacks are launched against Jerusalem for the first time since the 30th of October. All were intercepted by the Iron Dome defense system. So let's talk about that first. Okay, so this is the website Seva Adom, which is like a rocket alert system. And at the time that I'm recording this, the most recent attack was the attack on Jerusalem. It was 13 hours ago. And when you can see these other ones, there's like much smaller attacks, mostly around Gaza. It looks like there might be some up by Lebanon. Whenever it has confrontation line, that's usually talking about that area. In fact, let me just look at this one really quick. Yeah, this is up by Lebanon. So smaller rocket attacks. But this one against Jerusalem sticks out because even though I haven't been really watching this for like the last couple of weeks, it's not usual to see a rocket attack against Jerusalem. It has happened, and I'm going to show you the ones that I was able to find. But this is what Jerusalem looked like earlier today. It was Jerusalem and then the areas that are, just west of Jerusalem. So I find that interesting. I find it interesting that it's happening on the 70th day of the war. I don't know if there's any meaning behind that or significance to it, but it led to scenes like this. Here you have people at the Kotel or the Western, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, and people are running for cover because the sirens are going off. So a really scary scene. You have this over here. Somebody was up on the Temple Mount and, taking video as the sirens are going off. And it's weird because, I don't think there's any way that Hamas can ensure that one of those rockets don't hit Al-Aqsa Mosque, or there's a rocket right there, or the Dome of the Rock. What if that happened? Holy cow, what would happen if that happened? I don't know. I-24 News. This is in Israel. It's an Israeli news agency. Multiple rockets intercepted over Jerusalem after barrage from Gaza. And what they said about it is that it was a rare attack. The rare attack on Jerusalem comes despite intensifying international calls for restraint on both sides as the war between Israel and Gaza terrorists nears 3 months. Well, at this point, I'm not sure that there's going to be restraint. One side is fighting for their lives, literally, because Israel said that they're going to kill all of them, referring to Hamas. Israel said that every member of Hamas is a dead man. So, and then Israel can't let this happen again. They can't just like stop and be like, okay, now don't do that again. Especially when, as the war was going on, they said, you know what, there's going to be more. Hamas said there's going to be more attacks like what you just saw. So I don't think there's going to be any restraint until this is done. Hamas said that the red line for Hezbollah in Iran is definitely if Hamas is completely wiped out. That's yet to be seen, but we'll have to keep an eye on that. Okay, so here are some of the other rocket attacks that have taken place on Jerusalem. This one was on the first day of the war, October 7th, and I suppose this is part of the very first or initial attack as they were starting to make their incursion into Israel and into these little towns, and they're called oh my gosh, the word escapes me right now. Kibbutz. It's like a communal farm. They went into those like kibbutzes and killed anyone that they came across, and they also went door to door, and for some reason they picked some people while killing others, but they took some hostage and took them back into Gaza. But anyway, here was the first attack. I searched high and low on X, the best that I could, to try and find all the Jerusalem attacks, and I think that I got them all. This one was 2 days later, on the 9th of October, and looks like there were a lot of areas, a lot of sectors that were activated as far as the alert system goes on that one. This one was 7 days later. It was attack on mostly Tel Aviv, but there were a couple places here in and around Jerusalem that went on alert. And during that attack on the 16th, this is the Knesset. It's their legislative branch. So they went to shelters, because of the rocket attack. And then the most recent one, aside from the one that happened today, on the 30th of October, also, relatively small, but apparently this was the last one. So you do have Jerusalem itself under attack. And I shouldn't have deleted it, but on Google Earth, I was trying to keep track of any of the skirmishes that I came across that were happening in Jerusalem. And there were a number of those right there in the city, but I deleted them because I hadn't heard anything for a while. But anyway, let's move on and let's talk about these hostages that were killed. IDF troops mistakenly opened fire and kill 3 hostages in northern Gaza battlefield. Okay, so this was North Gaza. Israel Defense Force troops mistakenly identified 3 Israeli hostages in northern Gaza's Shejaya neighborhood as a threat and opened fire at them, killing them. IDF spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari announced Friday evening. Hagari said the IDF bears full responsibility for the quote-unquote tragic incident which took place on Friday morning. Quote, in an area where the soldiers encountered many terrorists, including suicide bombers, end quote. The incident occurred in the Gaza neighborhood that has seen some of the heaviest fighting in recent days. Asked how the hostages were able to escape Hamas activity, Hagari said the military believes that, quote, the three fled or were abandoned by the terrorists who held them captive as IDF forces closed in. So that is a really upsetting end to their lives, obviously. I don't know that I really blame the IDF because, like, it's war and you have the fog of war. You don't always know who's who. Things get confusing, and you know it's a life and death situation. So, but and I'm sure a lot of people understand that, but it resulted in this. Okay, Times of Israel: hundreds march in Tel Aviv demanding hostage deal after IDF killed 3 in tragic error. So on my Google Earth, whenever I see protests of any sort, I'm just trying to keep track of those. Just, I'm trying to keep track of as much as I can. So whenever it's a riot, I do a flag for whatever the cause or whoever it is to identify them. So this is what we have this month. By the way, I have a few things here on Google Earth for December. I'm going to try and go through X and see if I can find what else has been going on, because I've kind of dropped the ball as far as that goes. But there have been a few things that I've taken note of, but I'll do that in another video. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, and then now I don't know how big this is going to get. It says hundreds, so it's not like thousands. We've been watching these protests throughout the year, the judicial overhaul protests, and those have been in the thousands, and they've been pretty regular, like at least on a weekly basis. They've been having these large protests, which the protests seem to have led to this war because Israel's enemies saw Israel as divided and at the point of civil war, potentially. There had been actual talk of civil war, even if nobody really believed it. But whatever the case, they saw an opportunity, and it looks like they took it. So during the war, a lot of that has simmered down. There's still a lot of people that don't like the current government. I've seen a lot of criticism against Benjamin Netanyahu by different accounts on X that are Israelis, but they're against the overhaul and they're against his government and stuff like that. And this doesn't help. At a time when Israel needs to be united, this doesn't help. This may be an isolated thing, but maybe not. It may, for all I know, maybe there's going to be more protests after this. It's going to be something that we'll have to keep an eye on. Large crowds amassed late Friday in Tel Aviv for a flash protest, urging the government to take the initiative to secure the release of hostages held by Hamas, after the army announced it mistakenly killed 3 of them in Gaza. The demonstrators blocked traffic at the Kaplan Junction as they marched toward the IDF's Kiryat military headquarters, where they called for a new agreement to return the remaining hostages who were kidnapped during the Hamas-led onslaught in southern Israel on October 7th. Their time is running out. Bring them home now, the crowd was heard chanting. There's no victory until every last hostage is released. I know there's been debate from what I've seen, different ideas of how to resolve this. On the one side, you don't want to reward Hamas, when you give in to their demands. It's the whole thing of like not negotiating with terrorists, because when you do that, you potentially open the door for more of that in the future, either from that same group or from others. But at the same time, you do want the hostages back. And there have been exchanges of hostages for prisoners. So that has happened. As you probably know, there was a ceasefire for a while and they were able to exchange, but, combat fighting has resumed. So it's just really difficult. And obviously emotions are running really high. I mean, who has the right answer? I don't know, but people are upset, and I would obviously be very upset if, I was really worried about my loved one. It's already bad enough that they're gone. You don't know what's happening to them, how they're being treated. Don't know if you're going to see them again, only to find out that they were killed by your own military in an accident. So, okay. And then to finish this off, I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but like this has kind of been making the rounds. I'm reading this story from Israel 365 News, but I know it's been other places too. The article is called Divine Retribution. Turkish lawmaker threatens Israel, immediately has heart attack. I'm not laughing at his, death, but that is okay. So let me read it. I'm not going to play the video of it, but you can watch it. It's right here. I'll repost it on my X account. But that is literally what happened. He basically said, he says this: "You will not escape the wrath of Allah. I salute you all." And immediately he has a heart attack and he falls to the ground, and he hit his head on the ground. Hassan Bitmiz, a 53-year-old parliamentarian representing the Islamist Saadet or Felicity Party, delivered an address at the General Assembly of the Turkish Parliament on Tuesday, accusing Israel of crimes against humanity and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. He concluded by threatening Israel. Quote, "We can perhaps hide from our conscience, but not from history. Israel will not escape the wrath of Allah," he said about Israel's war against Hamas. "You will not escape the wrath of Allah," Bitmitz said, adding, "I salute you all." He then collapsed at the podium. MP Dr. Turhan Komez, or Samez, or I don't know, began giving him CPR on the floor of the assembly before Bitmis was carried into an ambulance on a stretcher. According to Turkish Health Minister Fahrettin Koca, Bitmis was hospitalized and his condition was listed as extremely critical and serious, quote unquote. I feel like that's a sign. I feel like that's a sign. That is so crazy. It's like something. It's like from out of a movie or something like that. But it actually happened. He said those words. It's all within just 5 seconds or something like that. He says those words and he immediately collapses to the floor as he has a heart attack. It's one of the craziest things I've ever seen. Maybe it's a sign. Well, there's been a lot of interesting things going on with Turkey. The most interesting for me of which, and I know I bring this up a lot, but, Olive Grove split by earthquake. Yes. Let's go to NBC News. Nope, it's going to play a video. Go to CNN. That's the one I usually go to. This year started off with a large earthquake in Turkey. There were actually 2 of them. And it killed people both in Turkey and Syria. But there was another interesting occurrence where there was an olive grove on a mountain visually similar to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem, and the earthquake caused it to split. Okay, it split. I take this as a sign. I know some people don't. There was one person that said no, because this isn't a way to escape. From my point of view, it is, because you have lots of cover and concealment. Okay, meaning that if you have people chasing you, it's hard because there's a lot of places that you can kind of like find cover as you're escaping, and it's not easy for the enemy to pursue, you know. So I feel like it is now. Maybe it will be a very clean cut when the Mount of Olives in Israel splits, but I think that's beside the point. There was a Mount of Olives that literally cleaved in twain earlier this year in Turkey, and now in Turkey you have a member of the government that basically condemned Israel, right? Saying you will not escape the wrath of Allah, and then he has a freaking heart attack. Just like how, as Israel's being attacked, and it seems like they're doomed, you know, it's going to turn on their own heads. So, I don't know. Make of that what you will. But that's going to be it for this one. So if you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe. Like this video if you liked it. Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.